Columbia Broadcasting System and its affiliated stations present Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater on the air in The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells.
Welcome to... Stephanie, where are you? There you are. Where were you?
I'm so sorry. I was just leading my away team on an away mission.
Oh, and you didn't take me.
Well, you are... I didn't want you to die.
I can't do it.
I'm gonna try that again.
Live long and prosper.
Live long and prosper. Okay, ready?
Welcome to...
Positively Literary. Live long and prosper.
And today's topic is sci-fi and sci-fi books. So I'm pretty excited about this.
If you couldn't already tell.
Yeah, and these outfits are courtesy of the Star Trek fan. I never asked you, did you watch Star Trek?
A little bit, yeah, because my dad was a big Star Trek fan, so I would sit in and watch a little, but I didn't understand what was going on.
I have respect for your father.
Thank you.
And
so the audio that you heard at the beginning is Orson Welles' radio play, The War of the Worlds.
This weather report comes to you from the Government Weather Bureau. We take you now to the Meridian Room in the Hotel Park Plaza in downtown New York.
So it was an hour-long broadcast on the CBS radio network on October 30th, 1938. So I just thought this was so interesting. It was a sci-fi radio play broadcast, and the play was part of Wells' weekly radio series, which presented classical literature works. But this is the interesting part. The broadcast caused panic in many areas. Some newspapers and public figures described the program's news bulletin format as deceptive.
Okay, I totally have heard this. I've read this before, yeah.
And leading to calls for FCC regulations.
I remember this. I totally heard this, like where there was panic and I think it scared some people as well.
So I was listening to it somewhat recently because I was curious about it, and it's like a sci-fi broadcast. And of course nowadays I'm like, well, why would you believe that that's actually happening? But back then, the radio was the way you got your news. And also, you might not have been listening from beginning to end. So if you just tune in and there's like a radio announcement of some kind of mass panic or something, then you're like, is this happening for real? And so I can totally see it. And I'm glad that they have regulations now. But actually, this kind of makes me think, and this is sci-fi related, of AI and how the fake news and the deep fake things, and how that is maybe something that could happen to us, like through the use of like AI itself, depending on...
Oh, interesting. Before we dive in, should we talk about
our drinks? Okay.
No one has to know.
I forgot to put out some really fun paraphernalia.
Oh yes, let's see.
I won't talk about this except that it works for real. So
that's so cool.
Okay, come on, buddy.
He doesn't want to cooperate. He's like, no.
Look at this.
Oh, that's so wicked.
Okay.
Sorry.
I tasted before you. I'm sorry.
I want to try.
It's so good.
It's much better than...
It's getting a little strong. I reached out to Edward Willet to talk about from Shadowpaw Press. So he has a publishing company and publishes a lot of sci-fi, which is cool, and local as well. So what we asked him was, what makes a great sci-fi novel? And what are your helpful tips to new writers wanting to get into the sci-fi genre?
Let's hear from Edward.
So what makes a great science fiction novel? I've been thinking a lot about that since I saw this question, and it's interesting that what makes a great science fiction novel isn't necessarily what makes a great literary novel. There's an old saying that science fiction is the literature of ideas, and I think certainly when I started reading science fiction as a kid back in the 60s and 70s, many of what I considered the greatest science fiction novels are perhaps not the greatest when it comes to literary stylings, on a sentence by sentence basis, all of the nice prosy things that that writers like to talk about. Nevertheless, they were great science fiction novels because they had, at their core, a great idea. And that's why science fiction is called the literature of ideas. What was most important, and I think to a large extent still is, if you're going to have a great science fiction novel, is that idea that's at the core of it. Now, of course, what makes it science fiction in the first place? Well, I always like what Orson Scott Card says to distinguish between science fiction and fantasy, that science fiction has rivets and fantasy has trees, but that's not quite true. In fact, I have written fantasy that has rivets, so there you go. There's something to that in that science fiction is based in the real world, in some version of the real world. It might be the future of the real world, it might be the past. You can get into the alternate reality thing, which I kind of bridges between science fiction and fantasy, I think. But nevertheless, generally speaking, in science fiction, you're trying to deal with the world as it is, how we understand the world, and the way that science works, natural law, and all of that. If you're going to break what we know as well-established natural law in a science fiction novel, you have to have a reason for it. You have to have it, maybe a bit of hand-waving, but you have to at least realize that you are dealing with what we think of as the real world and the way that things work in the real world, and you're extrapolating from that, you're bending it, you're perhaps putting it into the future. If you're going to have some future technology, it should have at least some passing resemblance to something that might be possible as we understand science. That's what makes science fiction. Now, there are gradations of that all over the place. So you get into things like Star Wars. Is that science fiction? Well, it has spaceships, but really it's more of a fantasy story. Star Trek, a bit more on the science fiction side. Some episodes are quite good science fiction, but there's a lot of hand-waving there as well, and things that just don't actually make sense scientifically as we understand science today. And, you know, ultimately you are writing a story. All the same, I think the greatest science fiction novels are the ones that are most tied to real science and where that might go, how changes in our understanding of the world scientifically might affect us in the future. You can think of some classic elements I think still apply, like science fiction. Aliens landing is certainly not outside the realm of possibility. Faster than light travel, it might be impossible. And at the same time, as I said, you're trying to tell stories, so you do, you know, sometimes you just, if you break one thing, that's fine, but don't break too many things, or you're going into fantasy instead of science fiction. I guess that's the rule. Now, as I said, that was when I started reading and just writing science fiction, for that matter, that literature of the idea, and that you could have a great science fiction novel that had great ideas, but not necessarily great writing. I think today, the science fiction realm has moved forward, and you now have absolutely fabulous writing in the best science fiction novels, whether you're looking at it as a literary critic or as a science fiction critic. You can find really great writing, you can find great characterization, all those sorts of things, great settings. And so I think today what makes a great science fiction novel is those things as well. Great writing, great characterization, great plotting. Plots are very important in science fiction, generally speaking, but not necessarily. At the core, though, is still that great idea. So where do those ideas come from? Well, there's two classic methods of writing science fiction, and any one of them could give you a great science fiction novel. One of them is, of course, If This Goes On, where you look at things that are happening around us right now in the realm of science, or in society for that matter, and you extrapolate that into the future, see what scientific change, what impact that might have on future society. It's not about predicting, it's about warning what might happen in the future if we carry on with certain things that are happening right now in the scientific realm or technological realm. So that's one, If This Goes On. The other one is What If? And that takes us back to things like, what if aliens landed tomorrow? What if an asteroid hit the Earth? Those are all within the realm of scientific possibility, but they're not really an extrapolation of the current situation, but just things that might happen. So those are the ways that you come up with those ideas for science fiction novels. And the great ones are the great authors, and the great books are the ones that take those great ideas, surround them with great prose, great characterization, and a unique take on the world, a unique voice. I think that's what makes a great science fiction novel these days, is all of those things together. Now, as for advice as to how you get into writing science fiction, well, there's only two bits of advice, and I've been giving the same bits of advice for as long as I've been giving advice, which is read science fiction, read modern science fiction, read old science fiction too. Read modern science fiction. You have to immerse yourself in science fiction to see how science fiction writers deal with the unique problems of science fiction. Things like telling telling the reader how the world works when it's not really our world, and yet doing that without bringing the action to a halt or having somebody give a lecture. As you know, Bob is the classic example. So that's one thing. By reading science fiction, you learn how people write science fiction. You learn how people deal with the same problems you will encounter as you write science fiction. Everything from describing the indescribable to outer space combat, whatever. All these things are problems that have to be solved when you write science fiction, and the only way you learn how to solve those problems is to read. And then the other piece of advice goes to anybody that wants to write. You have to write. Write something, try to get it published, write something else while that's waiting to get published. I don't think that advice has changed. So that's my advice and my take on what makes a great science fiction novel, and who knows, maybe if you take my advice, you'll write the next one.
Welcome back, and thank you to Edward Willet. That was really interesting. We'll put his information, if you're watching on YouTube, down below so you can look at the books that they've published. And I wrote down, I had asked you because we were like on the phone, and I was like, this new show on Netflix, Investigation Alien. I'm like, well, our sci-fi episode is coming up, let's watch this. So we're kind of watching it not together, but in two different locations, watching it together. Did you get into episode 2? Okay.
I got bored.
Yeah, I know, because I still think it's very interesting because they have some fascinating footage. That's real footage.
Well, actually, I did get into number 2 a little. And then I stopped.
Did you see the alien that was just a strange essence thing that you could only see with a heat camera that went across an entire military base?
I did see that.
And it was kind of creepy because so that was footage that was never supposed to get out. So that's interesting. But it was a strange, almost like a jellyfish creature, and you're like, well, that's stupid. But it does honestly look like real footage, and it goes through the military base, and then it goes into the water. And this is the really interesting part.
That's what's trending right now. It's that talk. There's a whole thing right now trending on TikTok.
Really?
About aliens being in the ocean or hiding in the ocean.
I had never heard of this. And so they're called USOs, and it's unidentified submerged objects. So when I saw episode 2, and then this creature goes into the water, and then they say, I think 17 minutes later, it comes back out. And so that's interesting. And then later they talk to these fishermen of this other country, whatever, where they talk about how the ocean lit up like daytime, and then this, I guess, orb or something of light, it comes up, and then it kind of like hovers for a minute, it comes out of the ocean, and then it zooms off like it's a flying thing. And then they also have a lady, so the lady on there, she's a military pilot, and so she understands aviation really well. And so some of the footage they're looking at where it zooms off. So anyway, I love it. I love this. I've never heard of USOs until this show, but you have on TikTok?
This is recent, so I think this is because of this document.
Oh, so people.
So other people are watching this document, and everybody's like, "I knew it!" And here's a fun fact: did you know that we have explored or discovered more about space than our own oceans?
Okay, so I didn't know that, but what I do know is that a lot of the oceans are unexplored.
Yes.
And it makes sense to me that if there were aliens, that if they wanted to kind of set up a base or something, that they would just go into the part that we don't go into, which is the deepest ocean.
I heard something interesting. I don't know how accurate it is, but I heard supposedly, and I don't know, supposedly there was this guy that came out saying he used to work for NASA, and before they decided way back before they decided to actually explore space, they wanted to explore the ocean. And apparently they found something that was so terrifying that they were like, we're no longer touching the ocean. We're not going there anymore.
Okay.
So, yeah.
But it's not known what it was.
What he said is they ran into an eye down there, eye of a creature that was as big as a house.
I mean, that would scare me.
I know. So after that, they decided they would no longer explore. So I don't know how accurate it is, because, you know, a lot of people come out and be like, I used to be this and that for like views and stuff. So I don't know. But that's just a story I heard, and I'm like, don't know how accurate that is.
I think it's interesting, like NASA exploring the oceans. It is hard to explore the oceans because you would need something that can get down that far, and I know there's submarines, but...
And there's some oceans that are like bottomless.
And that makes me wonder, yeah, I know what you mean, how... Well, there's some lakes that it's like they're bottomless, and the idea is like they connect to the ocean, but like that's really hard. Let's talk about some books, sci-fi books. I think the ones I'm going to talk about... Well, okay, let's talk about The Man of Cloud 9.
So I have this book too.
Yeah, okay. Did you start it? Or I know how busy...
haven't.
Yeah, because you just moved.
But I have it.
Yeah, I started reading this. I just recently got it, and it is a local author, Adam Dries. The thing I really enjoyed about it, so I'm getting close to the end. I think it was refreshing for me. I'm not enjoying romance books as much lately, and for many reasons. But so it's about this professor. So it's in the future, which is really interesting. It's in the future, and the way Adam Dries sets up the future and their communication system and everything like that, and then this man discovers a new way of communicating. It's almost like, just imagine before cell phones come out, and then just starting to have the ability to do something like that. The reason I liked it is it was so refreshing to read something that was taking place like in a university. You know, it's not about romance, it is kind of about his... Cloud 9 is the name of... It's kind of like iPhone, but Cloud 9, that's the... So yeah, I was really enjoying it, and I think life just got busy, so I did stop here. And I think I just appreciated that it wasn't about romance, and that I like the sci-fi world that he set up. I like it's a future world, and that university vibe. Like, I actually like university vibes. So do you, because you want to go back to university.
That's right. Oh, I am.
Because is that like something...
To be honest, I've never been to university. This is my first time. I was in college.
You were in college and you did the reporting,
and now I'm going back.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Did you tell me? Because sometimes she tells me things and I'm like, not that I'm not listening. My brain might have been thinking something else. So as far as I know that you were like, I'm going to be going back to university. What was the...
English arts.
Really? Wait, did I know that?
Yeah, it is for creative writing. So I'm going into that.
And do you want to pursue, like, just to get better at writing, or is it like to teach writing?
No, it's just I want a degree in writing.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And then, I mean, university level writing is like, as you can tell, I love Star Trek. So I got these two books. So I do particularly like the one with Jean-Luc Picard, The Next Generation, right? So I read this one. Unfortunately, when I read this one, it feels very much geared towards men. I know this. Because, so the holodeck, you know, where anything can happen on the holodeck, because it can be like, so half the novel is about like the stuff going on the holodeck, which has to do with baseball. And
interesting.
And I feel like if a guy was reading it, and maybe an older guy, would be like, oh yeah, that's so cool in history. But I'm not so much
You're not as familiar.
Yeah, so this wasn't as much fun. Maybe this will be more fun to read. So another kind of sci-fi is just picking up your favorite like show, like Star Trek, or there's actually some Star Wars books out in the world. And this is what I'm currently reading, so I do want to talk about it.
Okay.
Sorry once again, because you don't live here. You don't
It's
have
all
your
good.
books with
I don't
you.
have my books. I need to make a note to bring them.
But I do want to ask you, what do you think of sci-fi as a genre? Because I haven't heard you talk about having read any. Like, have you read, or are you interested in sci-fi books?
Okay, so this is interesting for me because I used to do like book reviews for people on YouTube, and
I didn't know that.
yeah, and I was careful with how I did the review. Each star counted for something. Like, one was target audience, the other was grammar, the other was, character development. Each star represents something. And the reason I did this is because just doing reviews based off of especially with books, based off of just your opinion is not very effective to the book because it might not be something that's in your favorite genre.
And as an author, I completely agree because I've seen people review, it's like if you don't like fantasy, then why did you read my book? Or for example, mine has romance, and if you absolutely hate romance and you read it and then you're like, I hated the book, it's because it's not your genre.
And that's the reason why I did it that way, because it's a fair and it's more like, I even had a star if it matches their target audience, right? Like age and stuff like that, right?
Oh, you mean the book?
Yeah.
Okay, so 100%, I know what you mean. There's books that they say they're YA, young adult, and you're like, there's so many reasons why this isn't young adult. Just because your character is this age does not make it a young adult book. Like, it's a very specific genre. Like, do you know what I mean? So, okay, that's fascinating. So then
So I did a couple of books, and I feel like I'm gonna get eaten here.
Don't mention names, but did you do a sci-fi book?
No, I haven't. But sci-fi is not completely my thing, to be honest.
I felt
it's not my beat.
I kind of felt that. That's why I was asking, because I was like, I never really asked you if like sci-fi is a genre that you enjoy, because you love fantasy, and
I am a fantasy girl.
It is different.
Yeah, so, but my husband, on the other hand, is a sci-fi guy. He loves his sci-fi. He likes, like, the futuristic. He likes the space. He likes zombies. Zombies are actually, like, zombie books don't always fall, actually, in the horror. Sometimes they fall in sci-fi, believe it or not.
Which, I guess it kind of makes sense to me. But in my mind, because you mentioned that before, and I was like, I would have put it in the dystopian. Or not, okay, I guess dystopian has to do with
horror.
The government. No, you're right. Dystopian has to do, I keep thinking that dystopian is just a future world that is different than ours, and like something is happening like apocalyptic. But not, it isn't, because what it actually is, and more has to do with like government control. So yeah, I like young adult dystopian because somehow they just get it. There are some, so we're going to do an episode on that because I have some favorite ones on my bookshelf. So this one I happened to pick up at a secondhand bookstore.
Glow.
Yeah, it's called Glow, and it's a sci-fi. And to be honest, I haven't read a lot of like purely sci-fi. So this takes place in space. Like they're in a community that's been flying in a spaceship for, I don't know, like 40, 50 years.
Does it have elements of dystopian?
Yeah, actually. It does, actually. So there's teenagers, so it's young adults, there's teenagers, and that's all they've known. They've lived on this ship, right? And their parents are in trouble. I think I'm about halfway through, and the reason I stopped reading, and this seems to happen in a lot of sci-fis I've been reading, is the biological things that happen. Like the parents are trapped in this area where the radiation is like their faces are bloating and like they're inside, you know, like radiation.
Wow, that's so sad.
And so they're watching their parents on these little screens like dying of radiation.
Oh wow.
Yeah. And then someone throws up, and then they have headaches, they're throwing up, like these things that happen in space, which I don't know, I'm more of a person that likes comfortable, like Star Trek. They're comfortable on the ship on Star Trek.
Where they're not as comfortable.
This is more realistic. So the crazy, kind of very interesting but different thing that happens is the other ship takes the children on, and there's sort of like this religious order that's on the other ship.
Interesting.
And they have a matriarchy because the lead pastor, whatever, is a female, and so we don't know if she's kind of evil and they killed off the parents so they could take the children because they can't produce children. So it
sounds interesting.
It is really interesting, but it's also
graphic.
Yeah, graphic, which takes me to not as much as this one, and I have talked about Charles James before. Not that it's like super graphic, but again, with sci-fi, you're in space and they have issues, like someone gets a infection, and kind of like those biological things that happen, they go on another planet and they have to deal with like another species and things like infections, and so I don't know if sci-fi is a favorite genre of mine because I don't like the idea of,
She doesn't like pain.
I don't like pain, but that's another reason why fantasy, there are some fantasy books that I
Like mine.
well, no, yours is okay. I call them book of pain.
Okay.
So if I read a fantasy where she's traveling and like all these things keep happening to her, we're like, how is she surviving all this? One thing after another. So suffering. The book of suffering. I remember reading a fantasy and I was like, we should just title this the book of suffering. She's just suffering from beginning to
My
end.
goodness, this reminds me of Grey's Anatomy.
Oh, I never watched it.
Okay, it upsets me because we're like, this is so unrealistic. It's like there was a shooting in the hospital and then they like shoot one of the main characters and we're like, oh, gasp, and then straight after there's an airplane crash and all these like things happening
Okay.
that are not like being struck by lightning. They're not like,
Oh, they're not things that happen all the time.
yes, but there's like one tragedy after another, and then the main character almost drowns because she like was a klutz and fell into the water. Do you know what I mean?
Is it the ER? Are they like working in the ER?
Yes, but then there's
So-
a shooting in the ER, and then they go to travel to go help, I don't know, people in their airplane crashes, and all these characters die, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I just feel like this, but it happens, there's no break. It's like one after another.
I think, like you said, people like certain genres or something. I think it's not necessarily a genre, but a trope that
Yes.
I don't really like, and that you understand, right? That also sounds like a show about suffering.
I like things realistic, and I just don't think that realistically there'd be as many
Tragedies, yeah.
tragedies
So-
as there was back to back.
Okay, this is fascinating to me because it kind of explains why maybe you don't take to sci-fi if you like things kind of on a realistic level.
I do.
And I think you can write sci-fi in two different ways. There can be kind of like the Star Trek more comfortable way. Everyone's like pretty comfortable in their really nice their quarters, right? And then you've got kind of a more realistic things like the puking, and so the kids at some point have zero gravity, and that makes your stomach go weird. That makes you throw up. And then there's some babies also crying because only the children have survived. So it's like children taking care of children.
Oh, that's sad.
It's sad and almost too realistic. I think when a female writes sci-fi,
It gets intense.
no, but it gets realistic because they're like, this is what it would actually be like if we were, on a ship. But the guys are just like, pew, pew, pew. So I guess I read this a little while ago, like, again, young adult. So sci-fi, because this is kind of a retelling of Cinder, and she's kind of a cyborg, which they're really looked down upon in this futuristic society or whatever. But instead of losing a shoe, I think she loses
Her leg.
yeah. And it gets left behind, and there's like a prince. There's also a queen that lives on the moon, so the moon is inhabited, and then that also goes into this book, which is part 2. It's called the Lunar Chronicles. The Lunar Chronicles. Actually, very, very good. This is one of my favorite books of all time.
Moving on.
Yes. Wait. What is this? This is called not Peace Be With You. Oh my gosh, that's Catholic.
It's